begins as a sound. Low at first, below conscious hearing, felt more than registered. A vibration that moves through the walls of buildings, through the soles of shoes, through the chest. The kind of frequency that dogs notice before people do. In Berlin on the morning of March the 6th, 1944, people are doing what people in wartime cities do. Moving through their lives with the practiced efficiency of those who have learned to keep going. A tram runs on Unter den Linden. A woman carries a shopping bag past a boarded-up window. A man in a greatcoat reads a newspaper at a kiosk. Then the sound grows. Heads begin to turn upward. The sky above Berlin is filling. White chalk lines stretch from horizon to horizon. Hundreds of them, ruler straight, crossing the city from west to east in terrible geometry. The flak towers open up, their 12.8-centimeter guns hammering in sequence, black puffs materializing at altitude in clusters, and there, barely visible as silver glints at 25,000 feet, the aircraft themselves. Not a handful, not a squadron, hundreds. March 6th, 1944. The Americans who flew this mission called it Black Monday, the worst day in the history of the 8th Air Force. They were right, and they had no idea what they had actually done. That sky above Berlin had never been crossed by American bombers. The RAF had been hitting the city since 1940. By night, with everything they had, sustaining losses that broke the mathematics of sustainable warfare. But broad daylight in formation, visible to every Berliner from the street. That had never happened. And there were people in Germany who had promised it never would. Hermann Göring made his guarantee in 1939, when the war was new and German air power seemed absolute. Enemy bombers would never reach Berlin. If one bomb fell on the capital, he told his countrymen, they could call him Meyer, a common surname, an everyman's name, the German equivalent of calling yourself nobody. It was the kind of boast a man makes when he cannot imagine the circumstances that would prove him wrong. He was wrong within months. The RAF proved it. Arthur Harris, the head of Bomber Command, believed he could break Germany through Berlin. His case was blunt and unambiguous. We can wreck Berlin from end to end if the USAAF come in with us, he wrote. It will cost us between 400 and 500 aircraft. It will cost Germany the war. Harris was half right. Between November 1943 and March 1944, Bomber Command launched 16 major raids on Berlin, 9,111 sorties in total. The cost was 492 aircraft destroyed and 954 more damaged, a loss rate of 5.8%. The RAF had defined 5% as the maximum a campaign could sustain without destroying itself. They flew past that threshold every time they went to Berlin. The bombs fell, the fires burned. The city was battered. In a single November night, one raid killed 2,000 Berliners and made 175,000 homeless. The following night, another 1,000 dead, another 100,000 displaced. And still the campaign continued into December, into January, the RAF bleeding at a rate that could only have one ending. British official historians were direct about that ending. The Battle of Berlin was not merely a failure, it was, in their words, a defeat. Harris had been willing to wreck his command against the German capital. He had not been willing to admit, until the evidence became undeniable, that he was wrecking it faster than he was wrecking Berlin. And through all of it, the distinction still held. No enemy aircraft had crossed Berlin in broad daylight. Göring's guarantee had been punctured in the dark, but never publicly, never visibly, in the full glare of a March afternoon with millions of Berliners looking up. That distinction still meant something. In the spring of 1944, it was about to mean everything. The Americans had a doctrine, and they believed in it with the particular conviction of people who had built it from theory rather than learned it from blood. High altitude, daylight, precision bombing. attack the specific industrial facilities that Germany's war economy could not replace, destroy them with accuracy, end the war without killing civilians in their beds. It was cleaner than what Harris was doing over Berlin at night, more purposeful. They built their entire air war around it. The theory held that bombers could protect themselves. Tight formations of B-17S and B-24S, all guns outward-facing, could generate defensive firepower dense enough to hold off fighter attack. The 8th Air Force tested this idea throughout 1942 and into 1943, pushing deeper into Germany each time, relying on formation discipline and armor to get the aircraft through. Then came October 14th, 1943. Schweinfurt, the ball-bearing plants, 60 B-17 and B-24 that never came home. Most of them were shot down beyond the range of American escort fighters. What the loss figures said, quietly and with finality, was this: the bomber cannot defend itself against a determined fighter force at depth. Send it alone far enough into Germany, and it will die. The 8th Air Force commanders acknowledged what the numbers demanded. They needed a long-range escort fighter. The North American P-51 Mustang with external drop tanks could fly to Berlin and back, fast enough to fight, agile enough to survive, ranged enough to go where the bombers went. The aircraft existed. The question was, who would use it, and how? In January 1944, Major General Jimmy Doolittle took command of the 8th Air Force. He was 47 years old, compact and physically powerful, a man who had earned the Medal of Honor for the 1942 Tokyo raid and spent his career making things work that had no business working. His directive on assuming command was clean: win the air war and isolate the battlefield. He studied the escort doctrine that kept P-51s locked to the bombers, shepherding them, forbidden to range ahead and hunt. He changed it immediately. Fighters were no longer there to guard the formation. They were there to find and destroy Luftwaffe aircraft in the air, on the ground, wherever they were found. The escorts were now hunters, not shepherds. In the last week of February 1944, Operation Argument, Big Week, put the new doctrine to the test. 12 aircraft factories hit across Germany. The Luftwaffe rose to defend them and paid for it. Both sides exhausted themselves. But the Americans had a replacement pipeline and Germany did not. Doolittle noted the arithmetic. Less than 2 weeks after Big Week ended, he was ready for the step that made everything else a rehearsal. The crews who filed into briefing rooms across East Anglia in the early hours of March 6th were told they were going to bomb 3 specific factories. The VKF ball-bearing plant at Erkner, Germany's 3rd largest. The Daimler-Benz Aero engine works at Genschigen, producing more than 1,000 engines a month. The Bosch electrical factory at Klein-Machnow. 3 industrial targets. Clear military objectives. Exactly the kind of precision mission the American doctrine had been built to execute. What the crews were not told was why Berlin was the target. The Luftwaffe, by the spring of 1944, had developed a rational strategy for surviving American bombing. It chose its battles. When formations headed for targets the Germans considered expendable, the interceptors held back, conserved strength, and let the bombers go. When targets were worth defending, the interceptors engaged, but on German terms, at the moment of their choosing. The Americans had superior numbers and a deepening supply of aircraft and crews. The Luftwaffe's only viable counter was to select its engagements carefully and make each one costly enough to matter. Berlin changed that calculus entirely. Berlin was the capital of the Reich, the symbolic heart of the Nazi state, the city where Goering had made his personal guarantee. Germany could not allow Berlin to be bombed in broad daylight without responding. Attack Berlin and the Luftwaffe had no choice. It had to fight on American terms, at a time and place of American choosing. Until now, Allied bombers had generally tried to avoid contact with the Luftwaffe fighter force. The new logic was precisely the opposite. use anything that forced the Luftwaffe into battle. The factories at Erkner and Genshagen were real targets. They were also cover. The actual quarry was the fighters that would come up to defend them. Doolittle understood this. He had concerns about what it meant. The American doctrine was built on the premise of bombing specific military targets, not using a city as bait. And he felt the distinction mattered. He got on the phone with his superior, General Karl Spaatz. No transcript of the conversation exists. A staff officer who was present remembered raised voices, and Spaatz responding to Doolittle's objection by telling him, in terms that left no room for discussion, to proceed. The order stood. What Doolittle privately felt about it, he carried with him when he died in 1993 at 96. He never mentioned the call in his autobiography. What he did on March 6, 1944, was sign the orders and send the aircraft. The bomber fields of East Anglia occupy flat Norfolk and Suffolk farmland, acres of concrete runway hacked from fields that grew wheat a few years before. On the night of March 5th into the 6th, ground crews move across the hard stands in blackout conditions, loading bombs into the bays of B-17 flying fortresses, running final checks on oxygen systems and gun mounts and control surfaces. The aircraft are large and cold and smell of oil and aluminum. The men working on them have been awake since midnight. Briefings finish for at least one group by 05:30. The target is announced and the room responds to it. Berlin, 600 miles away, the most heavily defended city in the German Reich. The scale of the escort is described. The probable defenses are described. Then the men go to their aircraft. First takeoffs begin around 800. What assembles over East Anglia in the following hours is the largest American bombing force ever sent anywhere. 563 B-17S and 249 B-24As, organized into 3 bomb divisions, escorted by 691 fighters, P-38 Lightnings, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs from the 8th and 9th Air Forces, and 3 squadrons of RAF Mustangs. More than 1,200 aircraft forming up in the gray morning sky and beginning to track east. The aircraft they fly is the B-17G, 4 1,900 horsepower turbo supercharged engines, a crew of 10 cruising at around 180 miles per hour. At 25,000 feet, the outside temperature is minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The aircraft is unpressurized, and every man above 10,000 feet breathes through an oxygen mask. A broken oxygen line at altitude can kill a man before his crewmates notice he has gone quiet on the interphone. The waist gun positions have open windows. The cold comes through them constantly and cannot be negotiated with. Men wear electrically heated flight suits and hope the elements function. When they don't, it is frostbite, hands, feet, faces. A round trip to Berlin means 8 to 10 hours inside an aluminum shell, much of it under fighter attack or flak. The skin is a barrier against cold and almost nothing else. These are the men, and these are the aircraft, crossing the English Channel into occupied Europe as the sun comes up on March 6th. The formation tracks east across Holland. Below them, low scattered cloud is building, cutting off the visual landmarks the navigators are searching for. Since the Zuiderzee, some lead crews report no recognizable landmark at all. They fly by dead reckoning, compass heading, airspeed, elapsed time, the way sailors navigated before charts, a method whose precision degrades steadily as the hours accumulate. They are heading toward the most heavily defended city in Europe, and some of them cannot confirm where they are. The German air defense network has no such uncertainty. As the formation crosses the Dutch coast, radar plots begin to accumulate. The controllers work the data: track, heading, speed, altitude. Within minutes, they have the probable target. At airfields across Germany, Holland, Belgium, and northern France, Luftwaffe fighter units run through the stages of alert. Unlike the British scrambles of 1940, when pilots had minutes to react before German bombers were overhead, The German controllers in 1944 have time. More time than they need. American aircraft fly 4 times as long over hostile territory to reach their targets as German pilots spent reaching London 4 years ago. By the time the bombers approach Berlin, the controllers will have spent hours working the intercept. They know when the escort is thinnest. The plan calls for 130 P-47 Thunderbolts to peel away from the formation, return to England to refuel, and rejoin the bombers on the way out, creating a gap deep over Germany, near the target. The controllers time their main attack for exactly that window. Among the interceptors being vectored toward the American formation is Hauptmann Hugo Frey of Jagdgeschwader 11, 26 confirmed heavy bomber kills. There are men like Frey scattered across the entire Luftwaffe order of battle. Aces who know the American formation's patterns, their weak points, the precise angle of attack that keeps a fighter outside the defensive fire while placing its rounds where they cause maximum damage. They have spent years acquiring this knowledge against this specific opponent. On March 6th, many of them are airborne and headed west. Against the western approach to Berlin, the Germans have committed a significant twin-engine force. Me-110 night fighters and Me-410 bomber destroyers assembled and pointed at the incoming Americans. The intercept is timed. The position is calculated. What the Germans do not account for is a pilot named Tommy Hayes. Major Tommy Hayes commands the 357th Fighter Group's target area support. The group has 3 weeks of combat experience. It has already lost its group, squadron, and flight commanders in those 3 weeks. The 357th is not yet setting the world on fire. Somewhere above the clouds approaching Berlin, Hayes makes a quiet discovery. He doesn't know where Berlin is. Hayes breaks radio silence. "Where is Berlin, OB?" The answer comes back. "I think Berlin is behind us." He holds course for 2 more minutes. Then he makes a 180-degree turn, and the 357th Fighter Group is now flying into Berlin from the east. From the wrong direction. From the direction no German controller had planned for. 2 minutes later, B-17 flying fortresses of the 1st Bomb Division emerge from a cloud bank to the left, 7 miles ahead. Someone on the radio. Bogies. 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. Level. Hayes looks right. There is Luftwaffe. Major Hans Kogler's 7 Me-110s. Behind them, a larger formation, 41 Me-410s and 72 Me-19s, in close order. At altitude, on a direct collision course with the American bombers. The German force is looking west. Hayes is behind them, coming from the east. Accident has placed the 357th Fighter Group in a perfect ambush position. A pilot who got lost, broke radio silence, and turned around has materialized directly behind the largest German interceptor force over Berlin, between them and the bombers they came to destroy. The engagement is brief. Nachtjagdgeschwader 5 sends up 14 Me-110s. 10 of them do not come back. Zerstörergeschwader 26 sends 18 aircraft. 11 do not come back. The twin-engine units Germany built and trained specifically to tear apart American bomber formations are shredded in minutes by a group of Mustang pilots who overflew their own target. The day's decisive defensive action over Berlin happens because one man didn't know where he was. The surviving German fighters scatter. The bombers press on. Over Berlin, the flak opens up. Captain Ed Curry, a bombardier with the 401st Bomb Group, has been to Oschersleben and through the Ruhr defenses. He has a basis for comparison. "I'd never seen flak as heavy as that they had over Berlin," he would say afterward. "That day we actually saw the red of the explosions." One shell burst close, chunks of metal through the radio room. More through the bomb bay. Somewhere in the chaos above the city, Hauptmann Hugo Frey. 26 kills, the best Germany had in this fight. is shot down by return fire from the bombers. Below all of this, on the streets of Berlin, people are doing something they have never done before in daylight, watching American aircraft directly overhead. The contrails stretch horizon to horizon, white chalk lines in the gray March sky, hundreds of them. The flak towers are hammering. Black smoke is materializing at altitude. Here and there a bomber begins to fall. But the formations hold. They keep coming, and Goering's guarantee, already hollow, has now ceased to exist in any form that can be hidden from the people beneath those lines. The bombers are over Berlin in broad daylight, and there is nothing anyone can do to make the sky empty again. The lead bombardiers of the 1st Bomb Division search below for the VKF ball-bearing plant at Erkner. The overcast has thickened as the formation arrived. There are no breaks. The clouds below are 8/10 solid and closing. The bombardiers wait for a gap that does not come, then switch to H2X radar, useful for finding a city, far too coarse for hitting a specific building inside it. Other groups bomb on similar instrumentation, releasing where the radar instructs, hoping proximity is enough. It is not enough. The 2nd Bomb Division sends a quarter of its assigned force against the Daimler-Benz works at Gensingen. The bombing is scattered and has no meaningful effect on production. The Bosch factory at Klein-Machnow is not hit. The Erkner ball-bearing plant is not hit. Some aircraft drop on targets of opportunity. Several groups release bombs on a bridge southwest of Potsdam. The official assessment is unambiguous. None of the aircraft bombed the primary targets because of weather. The same cloud cover that frustrated the bombing also degraded German radar tracking in the final approaches and complicated intercept geometry for Luftwaffe units still airborne. The weather favored no one. It punished everyone who entered it with equal indifference. But the VKF plant at Erkner would run its machines the following Monday morning. The Daimler-Benz workers at Gensingen would report for the day shift. The 3 factories the men had been briefed to destroy survived the day intact. The formation turns west and begins the long haul home. 69 heavy bombers do not return to England on the evening of March 6, 1944. 9 more than Schweinfurt. Schweinfurt had been bad enough to suspend deep penetration bombing for months. This is worse by every measure the 8th Air Force applies to such things. 60 more aircraft land with severe damage, 336 more with lesser damage. Each non-returning bomber carried 8 to 10 men. Between 600 and 690 American airmen are killed, captured, or missing in a single day. The men who flew it name it before the week is out. Black Monday, their worst day. They are right. The other side of the ledger reads differently. The Luftwaffe loses 160 aircraft on March 6, 1944. It loses 219 aircrew killed and missing, and 103 more wounded, almost all of them pilots. Against the American losses, these numbers suggest equivalence. They do not. The Luftwaffe's flying training organization is already short of aircraft, instructors, and fuel. It cannot replace losses at the rate it is sustaining them. The training pipeline that Germany would need to rebuild from this day does not have the raw material, the time, the fuel, the instructors, to function at the necessary pace. Every ace lost on March 6th represents years of accumulated combat experience that goes into the ground with him. Hauptmann Hugo Frey represented 26 American heavy bombers, a specific and measurable form of expertise acquired over years against the specific challenge of the American formation. He is one data point in a pattern that runs across the entire Luftwaffe. Germany was already running out of men like Frey. It had no means of making more. America's training apparatus is producing replacement crews at industrial scale. Germany's is broken and falling further behind with each engagement. The losses on both sides on March 6th look symmetrical at a glance. They are not, and the 8th Air Force is not finished with Berlin. On March 8th, 2 days later, 539 bombers return. On the 9th, 490. On the 22nd, 657. In the first weeks of March alone, more than 4,800 tons of bombs fall on Berlin. In March 1944 as a whole, the combined American air forces lose just over 400 bombers and fighters across 18 large-scale operations. Every loss is replaced by the American production and training system within weeks. During the same period, Luftwaffe units defending Germany lose 356 fighters destroyed and 163 damaged. None are replaced at pace. By April, the calculation has become irreversible. German fighter groups, unable to contest the airspace over Western Europe against the combined weight of bomber formations and hunting P-51 Mustangs, fall back to airfields inside Germany. The skies over France, Belgium, and Holland, the skies that any invasion of Europe will require, begin to empty of German aircraft. Not because the Luftwaffe concedes them, because the Luftwaffe no longer has the strength to hold them. The bombing campaign forces another reallocation that appears in no single air battle tally. In 1941, Germany committed 65% of its military forces to the Eastern Front. By 1944, that figure has fallen to 32%. Anti-aircraft guns and their crews, fighter units withheld from Russia to defend German cities, resources diverted from the Wehrmacht to cover the failures of German air power. The combined bombing offensive has opened a front that runs everywhere Germany is, simultaneously, and it is winning on all of it. On March 13, 1944, 1 week after Black Monday, the worst day in the history of the 8th Air Force, Jimmy Doolittle is promoted to Lieutenant General. 3 months after March 6th, on the morning of June 6, 1944, 156,000 Allied troops begin landing on the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious operation in history. The German defenses on those beaches are formidable. The casualties among the landing forces are severe. The day hangs in the balance for hours. The Luftwaffe flies fewer than 200 sorties over the beaches. In 1940, the Luftwaffe had achieved air superiority over France and the English Channel in weeks. The German fighter force that operated over France in the summer of 1940 was one of the most effective air combat organizations in history. The German fighter force operating over France in June 1944 was what remained after March, April, and May 1944. After Berlin, after the relentless follow-up missions, after 160 aircraft on a single day, after the twin-engine interceptor units that a lost pilot dismantled in 5 minutes over the German capital. The men on the beaches of Normandy could look up at the sky, not because the Luftwaffe chose not to be there, because it could not be there in any number that mattered. The men who died on March 6, 1944, were briefed on 3 factories. They were not told what those factories were cover for or what their mission was actually purchasing. The factories survived. The skies over Normandy did not remain German airspace. They were clear because of missions that began with 69 bombers not coming home on a day the men who flew it named for darkness, men who knew precisely what they had lost and were never told what that loss had bought. Albert Speer served as Germany's armaments minister throughout the war. He observed the bombing campaign from inside the apparatus it was dismantling, watched it break the Luftwaffe's ability to defend German industry and German airspace, and gave his verdict in post-war testimony. The air war, Speer said, was the greatest lost battle on the German side. Not Stalingrad, not Kursk, not the beaches of Normandy, the air war. The contrails over Berlin on March 6, 1944, crossed the sky from horizon to horizon and then dissolved. The men who drew them knew what they had cost. What they cost and what that cost purchased, those were 2 different ledgers. The men who flew carried only one.